Hello, we wanted to speak to you about this quilt. Since everyone in this room is 100% vaccinated, we're going to talk to you without our masks because when we tried it before with the masks, you couldn't hear us. And we're also trying this in a socially distanced environment. I'm Marian Ann Montgomery, the Curator of Clothing and Textiles here at the Museum of Texas Tech, where we have 34,000, actually more than that, objects, the largest collection of clothing and textiles at a university in our country. And I wanted to show you this particular quilt, which has come into us recently. It is a silk quilt. It's done in the log cabin pattern, and you'll get to see some of the wonderful piecing in the log cabin where they start with the center and then work out. I love the colors on this, but unfortunately, it was made with fabric at a time when silk was very precious and the manufacturers were taking cheap silk and weighting it with salts so that they could sell it as more expensive silk because the demand was so high. So across the country, there are many people who have examples of weighted silk in their collections, and that's why we want to talk about this, as well as the fact that we have a student who's doing a little work on it. Now, when you get to look at weighted silk, you'll see that it has sort of a shredded wheat look to it, and we'll do a close-up of that in a few minutes for you. And there's nothing you can do about the weighted silk. Once it turns into shredded wheat, all you can really do is do something to cover it. And so we have been covering it, and you might look at this netting and go, well, why in the world are she using such a dark colored netting? Well, we found when we used a light colored netting and you put it down over it that it just faded everything out. But when you used a dark color, it just went down into the fabric and your eye really didn't see it. And so that's what we're doing. Rachel Chauvin's going to tell you a little bit about what she's done on this quilt.
I've been overlaying the most damaged sections with the silk mesh and then tacking them in place through the back of the quilt because we're not going to worry about the back. It's never going to be displayed. And pulling it taut over it and sewing it in place along the edge to keep all of the pieces inside where they're supposed to be.
And so everything will still be here. It'll just be covered. You'll notice that Rachel's not wearing gloves, and you might say, oh my goodness, what is she doing? Why is she touching an object without gloves on? We never touch objects without gloves if we can avoid it here. You've all seen how your cell phone looks after you've had something to eat. You've touched the screen, you have to clean it. Rachel has been working on also some 1950s gowns that she's been rebeading, and she washes her hands thoroughly. And we have found that in working on an object, when you're actually stitching on it, gloves get in the way. And so it's much better for the object if you don't use the gloves when you're actually handling it and stitching. So there's a really good excuse if you want to handle these gorgeous objects and be able to do it without gloves. You can come and be a volunteer if you'd like, or a graduate student, of course. This particular quilt was made by Abby Stone Stafford, and she made it in the 1930s, but the fabrics do date from the end of the 19th century. And she acquired the fabrics from her daughter's mother-in-law. Her daughter married into a family that had a little more means, and her mother-in-law was Clara Brown Kent. And Clara had dressmakers. She had scraps from her dressmaker that she gave to her daughter-in-law's mother, Abby Stone Stafford, who made this quilt, as well as another small children's quilt that we have in the same log cabin pattern. But this is a really smashing quilt. It's one of, I love the blues in it. I love the way the colors were used. And I can imagine how lovely it looked on the bed at the time. Thanks for tuning in.